What if I told you the father of a nation was also a man who fought his demons in a bottle, survived a rebellion, and built a country out of sheer spite for the United States? Most Canadians know him as the face on the old $10 bill. But the real Sir John A. Macdonald was far more dangerous, brilliant, and flawed than any history book dares to admit. Let's dive into the chaos. It all began in Glasgow, 1815. Born into a family struggling with debt, young John moved to Upper Canada at age 5. Life wasn't kind. He witnessed the brutal murder of his younger brother at the hands of a drunken servant. This early trauma forged a man who was both deeply sensitive and incredibly tougher, duality that would define his entire political career. By 15, John was working in a law office. By 21, he was a lawyer defending the indefensible. He gained fame defending American invaders from the 1838 rebellion. Imagine a young, charismatic Scotsman standing in a tense courtroom, winning over juries with nothing but wit and legal acrobatics. He was a rising star in a colony that was about to explode into political turmoil. Behind the professional success was a devastating personal life. He married his cousin, Isabella Clark, but she spent most of their marriage bedridden with a mysterious, agonizing illness. John would often sit by her bed, drinking heavily to cope with the slow loss of his wife and the death of their firstborn son. This grief became the fuel for his legendary convivial drinking habits. In 1844, Macdonald entered politics. The Canadian political scene back then wasn't polite, it was a brawl. There were no clear parties, just shifting alliances and constant bickering between English and French colonists. John realized early on that to survive, you didn't need to be the loudest. You needed to be the one who could make everyone agree on a compromise. By the 1860s, the British colonies in North America were a mess. They were broke, disorganized, and terrified of an American invasion after the U.S. Civil War. Macdonald did the unthinkable. He teamed up with his arch-nemesis, George Brown. This great coalition was the spark that ignited the idea of a single, united country stretching from sea to sea. In 1864, Macdonald and his crew crashed a meeting in P.E. They didn't just bring ideas. They brought $13,000 worth of champagne. John knew that the way to a politician's heart was through his glass, through late-night parties and brilliant legal persuasion. He convinced the skeptical maritime leaders that they were stronger together than they were apart. Negotiations were brutal. There were debates over religion, language, and power. But Macdonald was a master of the long game. He drafted 72 resolutions that became the blueprint for the British North America Act. On July 1, 1867, the Dominion of Canada was born, and Queen Victoria named John A. Macdonald its first-ever Prime Minister. Macdonald had a vision, a railway. To him, Canada wasn't a country until a train could travel from the Atlantic to the Pacific. This was an insane engineering dream for a nation of only 3 million people. The Canadian Pacific Railway, CPR, became his obsession. It was the iron ribbon that would hold the provinces together before the Americans could swallow them up. But the railway almost destroyed him. In 1873, a massive scandal broke out. It was discovered that Macdonald had taken huge campaign donations from the businessmen he gave the railway contract to. The Pacific scandal forced him to resign in disgrace. His career looked dead. He retreated to the shadows, drinking heavily, while the country fell into a depression. Never count John A. out. 5 years later, he returned with the national policy. He promised high tariffs to protect Canadian industry and a finished railway. He campaigned with the slogan, "The old man, the old flag, the old policy." In a stunning political comeback, he was swept back into power. The old tomorrow, as they called him for his procrastination, was back. As the railway pushed west, it crashed into the lives of the Métis and Indigenous peoples. Louis Riel, the leader of the Métis, led a resistance against the Canadian government. Macdonald viewed this not as a struggle for rights, but as an act of treason that threatened the very existence of his fragile new country. The tension was at a breaking point. Macdonald sent the army west on his new railway to crush the rebellion. Riel was captured and sentenced to death. Despite massive protests from Quebec, Macdonald refused to show mercy, famously saying, "He shall hang though every dog in Quebec bark in his favor." This decision permanently scarred the relationship between French and English Canada. This is the darkest chapter of Macdonald's legacy. To clear the plains for the railway and settlers, his government used starvation policy to force indigenous tribes onto reserves. He authorized the creation of the residential school system, aiming to take the Indian out of the child. Modern history has judged these actions harshly, labeling them as cultural genocide. Despite the controversies, Macdonald was a political genius. He knew how to play his opponents like a fiddle. He once said, "I have no backsteers' influence. I am a plain, honest man." It was a lie, of course. He was a master of patronage, backroom deals, and keeping his friends close and his enemies closer. He was Canada's first true political animal. John's drinking was legendary. During a debate, he once vomited on stage. Without missing a beat, he told the crowd, "I get sick because I am forced to listen to the speeches of my opponent." People loved him not because he was perfect, but because he was relatable. He was a flawed man trying to do an impossible job. By the late 1880s, Macdonald was an institution. He had won 4 out of 5 elections since Confederation. He was knighted by the Queen and seen as the grandfather of the country. But his health was failing. The decades of late-night sessions, heavy drinking, and the stress of holding a country together were finally catching up to him. In 1891, at age 76, he fought his final election. The main issue? Trade with the U.S. Macdonald campaigned on pure Canadian nationalism, uttering his most famous line, "A British subject I was born. A British subject I will die." He won the election, but the campaign exhausted him. He suffered a series of strokes shortly after. On June 6, 1891, the Old Tomorrow finally ran out of time. Sir John A. Macdonald passed away while still in office. The entire nation went into mourning. Thousands lined the tracks as his funeral train carried his body from Ottawa back to his home in Kingston. The man was gone, but the country he had willed into existence remained. So, how do we remember him? Is he the visionary who built a nation from sea to sea, or the architect of systems that caused deep suffering? The truth is, he was both. Sir John A. Macdonald was a man of immense shadow and brilliant light. You can't have Canada without him, and you can't understand Canada without facing his complicated ghost.